medal of the college. To tell you that story, Father Vic said he wanted to give me something special. He didn't check it out. In fact, no one had a real good list of who had received the Petrillian Medal through the years. It was done through the president's office, but they didn't keep the accurate. So this occasion for with the symposium, maybe the 25th symposium or something, he wanted to give me the Petrillian Medal. But I had already received one, see. But I told him that afterwards, but we let it go at that. But I had 2 Petrillian medals. In fact, I lent one to Eileen so she could get a new one made because they lost the die or something for the other. So those were honors that I'm very happy to have received. But I think the high point was to see going really to the top of the Jesuits and seeing Father Arupe and seeing the other Jesuits throughout the world, to see what the vast Jesuit group, even though it has diminished in numbers, the numbers in Spain were very big. The Indian Jesuits impressed me tremendously. I had never known any Indian Jesuit. But all in all these different people were of the same cloth. They had the same background, the same thinking and feeling. So, and that my wife was happy doing all this was the best part of it all. She loved it because people loved her. Far more talkative and instructive and interesting than I am. I'm dull.
I wouldn't say that at all.
Hasn't been much, but so long as I can walk again and talk again, I suppose I should be happy again. But we just had our first great-grandson. We had 2 great-grandgirls, but no grandsons. Now we have a son.
Wonderful.
Past week, Mary Eakins had her boy, so that's happy. So now the other girl who is pregnant, she has 2 girls already. I don't know whether she's hoping for a girl this time, but she's having one around Christmas time. But they're all happy. And that's one of the happy parts of it, that the family has pretty much stayed together. No major problems, as it were. Maybe that's because I've been with the Jesuits. Maybe you can't get major problems with the Jesuits.
They keep you into trouble.
They keep you.
They keep you too busy to get into trouble, I guess.
Yeah. Well, if I get up now, I might not even be able to stand after all this.
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm tied in yet.
Well, that's not so much tied in. I mean, I can carry you and run with that, but I just wanted to make sure because you've been. Once you sit down for a couple of hours, getting up, it's
with your legs.
Yeah, that's it. That's why I'm going to be right here.
They're all tied. I get up in the morning from my toes to here to here. I took off these bandages. I live in bandages. So.
Okay, these are the suppose type things. You want me to pull you? I can pull you forward if you want to go straight down.
No.
Right.
I just have to get to the floor.
Okay, well, that's what I meant. I can help.
Or you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Wow. It's wonderful. I wonder if there was any corporal punishment in those days. Probably not.
No. Except from the sophomores
Oh.
when you were freshmen. because I guess it was not too far after we had gone through, I think they eliminated the so-called sophomore initiation.
Okay.
Because there were problems. I don't know exactly what, but that's another page in history too.
Right.
The,
I might touch upon that
Yeah.
in the interview. Wow. Yeah, I've heard things about if they, well, folks I've interviewed from the 50s, the seal in McDermott.
Yeah.
You know, if you walked on it, if you're a
Yeah.
freshman, you were in deep trouble.
Bad, bad.
Yeah, that was a no-no. Right,
We're
Bill?
looking pretty good, gang.
Yeah, isn't it?
Add a little bit
Okay, you
here.
can kick this out of the way.
You just gotta keep your nose out of the camera there, Alan.
Okay. I'm going to lean way back here. I'll try not to move too much.
We'll be fine on that. All right.
Good.
Oh, excuse me, sir. Let's come in here.
How are we looking on levels, Bill?
Your levels are looking fine.
Cool. Fly me
And,
to the moon.
I want to hear some more about this jazz in the course of it. It sounds like it was a fun time there, man.
Yeah.
And let me see. Do you have a tendency to use your hands when you talk?
Not really.
Not too much.
If you want to, I'll wave them around.
You do whatever is natural. I just try and anticipate a little bit of it with how I set you up on this. And
So you
Okay.
can make a point,
Okay.
Or
You
you
can
can-
make a point.
Straight at you.
Shoot
Right.
Right at you.
but I'm not going to move.
Now, what you really have to see, Alan has a lot of hair, but we're pretending he doesn't. You really look at the bald spot on the top of his head.
All right.
That's about in line with the camera.
Okay.
Which is about where we'd like you to talk. Now, you
All
can
right.
easily talk over his head. That's what it's all about.
Everything's over my head anyway, so it's like, this won't be a change.
That'll keep you
Okay.
inbound with that. Now, actually, there's one more thing I'm going to do. That's too far. Yeah, a second here to lessen that shadow.
Oh, that looks good.
Oh, wait a minute. No, that's not what it's doing. It's this one over here. All right. Just a little bit more.
So you are really in the spotlight now.
Absolutely.
Hey, let me tell ya.
Wow.
We'll put that man right in line with it all.
Looks good.
We'll take care of that. Okay, I think you're all right.
Okay, we're ready to go?
Go for it, sir.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Walter, thanks for...
Now, don't be afraid.
Okay, thanks, Vince. Okay, Mr. Walter, thank you for showing up today for our oral history project. I'm going to start you off with some basic questions and go into it. Please answer in as much detail as you like, and let's have some fun, okay? Okay, Mr. Walter, when and where were you born?
I was born in Paterson, New Jersey, March 15th, 1917, in the back bedroom of the family homestead.
Okay, can you tell me something about your family, your parents, your siblings, and growing up in Paterson?
Yes, well, it is one of my great misgivings, I guess, or misfortunes, that my father died 3 months before I was born. And so it was my mother who took upon the job of raising me, taking care of me and my sister, who was 12 years older, my sister Irene. I did have a brother, William, but he died as an infant. And so it was largely my mother who took care of me. She was a housewife. My father was a lithographer who worked in fine prints and colors in New York City.
Okay, well, leading up to St. Peter's, what did you do for schooling? Where did you attend grammar and high school?
I attended grammar school and high school in St. Joseph's Grammar and High School in Paterson, New Jersey. And this was one of 4 parish high schools. This was in the days before you had regional high school. Those schools have all now gone by the way and have been replaced by Paterson Catholic, which is the regional school in our area.
Very good. Okay, so you went to a Catholic school, and so how did you learn about St. Peter's, and what motivated you to attend the school?
Well, rather interestingly, I think I learned about St. Peter's because my good yearbook advisor at the high school level was looking for ads for the high school yearbook, and she suggested we touch all of the colleges in the area. And I think this was my first contact, in a way, with St. Peter's College. And I remember being in touch with the man who was the registrar at the time, one Pat Casey. And we did get the ad, and I think that was somewhat helpful, among other things, in deciding my coming to St. Peter's. although I think it was largely my mother's desire that I get a continued Catholic education. And she felt, I think, that the Jesuits were in a position to give it, plus the fact, transportation-wise, it would have been very difficult for me to get to another school. St. Peter's was right on the main line of the Erie Railroad, and I was a block and a half away from the station. So it all put together, and I'm happy it did.
Okay, very good. Okay, what did you first hope to accomplish once you attended St. Peter's? What were your ultimate goals?
Well, I think when I first started, I really didn't have any true idea of where I wanted to go vocation-wise. But I felt I wanted to get an education for whatever field I would enter. And I guess it was when I was approaching the end of my sophomore year that I more or less decided that I wanted to get into the education field, and that's where I did go.
Very good. Okay, I just wanted to touch back on something. Did any of your other family members or distant relatives or anybody else attend St. Peter's before you?
No. As a matter of fact, I think family-wise, I may have been the first to graduate from college. I'm happy to say, however, that all of my children are college graduates. All of my grandchildren who have reached college age or past college age are all college graduates. So maybe I was the first to get into the collegiate picture. But it was largely my mother who wanted me to get on educationally and find myself a place.
Tremendous. And we'll ask you about your children and grandchildren at the end of the interview here. Okay. Once you were enrolled at school, what were some of your first impressions of the school and the campus?
Well, I guess I had heard about college campuses, and I could envision trees and lawns and grass. But at St. Peter's, I found the so-called concrete campus, the sidewalks of Newark Avenue, Exchange Place. And I can envision myself getting off the Erie train into the path, that's so-called path now, it was called the Hudson Tubes then, and getting on that train, taking the first stop to Henderson Street, and then walking a block down to Newark Avenue, and there was the college. But it wasn't, as far as the campus was concerned, it wasn't exactly, I guess, what I might have envisioned, but I felt at home because Jersey City was much like Patterson, which was a large industrial city, and so there was no great difference as far as surroundings were concerned.
Okay, and you mentioned you were one of the first to be a student on the Kennedy Boulevard campus. Can you tell me about your first impressions of Kennedy Boulevard and the growing campus at that time?
Well, we were delighted, of course, I guess, to be the pioneers up here. We had spent the first 3 years down in the Chamber of Commerce building, and I can remember distinctly, I guess, the excavation of the campus up here on Hudson Boulevard, and that building was a temporary classroom building which was out there, and it was really a great, I guess, thrill to be almost a part of this as the first class up there, to feel that we were pioneering the way for the new campus, which was to be St. Peter's College. We were very pleased, very pleased. Although it meant walking a little further to get the tube, because now we had to get down to Journal Square, then get back to the Erie Railroad.
I guess you can't have...
You can't have everything.
Okay, just for the record, what years did you attend St. Peter's?
1933 to 1937.
Okay, very good. Okay, can you tell me about as a student, some of your first days on campus? What are some of your earliest recollections of fitting into the role of the St. Peter's College student?
Well, we felt, when I say we, I'm talking about those of us who came down from North Jersey on the Erie train. We felt that we were readily accepted by what we called the Jesuit scholars, people from Regis, Xavier, so-called prep schools. It didn't take us too long to find out that in many areas they were really superior academically, at least in our way of thinking. Most of these people were schooled in Greek and Latin. In those days, however, in the parochial schools of the city, the parish schools, 4 years of Latin was a requirement. I had 4 years of Latin before I approached college. And there was only one course in this school, and that was it. This was a classical course. There were very few Catholic high schools in those days who had anything other than that. Now, one of the schools in Patterson, St. John's, did have a commercial course. And Don Bosco had a technical school. But basically, this was a good classical education which was leading to college. And I must throw this in, when we arrived here, I think Father George Johnson, who was, again, one of the $1 million faculty, was the professor of, I guess, the classical languages. I never had him as a teacher, but he felt that to truly be a classicist, one had to be versed in Latin and Greek. And he referred to us, poor souls, as adulterated art students because we didn't have the Greek.
Very good. And, well, tell me about the requirements. Well, you're here, Jesuit education. What were some of the required courses or core curriculum you had to undertake?
Well, we had to, of course, take English. We had to take Latin. We had to take math. Then I guess the other courses were largely electives. But I remember distinctly, I think, in my first year, right on through, being exposed to courses in logic, epistemology, ontology, cosmology. This was before we got to the real stuff, the ethics, with Father Rankin. And I think it was always the Jesuit idea that everyone had to have a liberal arts education. And that was just great. But what it meant was that in addition to everything you needed vocationally, you got this for, I'd say, life training, for living. And it meant that I know when I graduated, I think 128 credits was the requirement. I had 157.5 because, and so did most of us, because in order to take all of the logic and philosophy which was involved, this was on top of everything else. And we got all of this. So these were the courses that we had to take. We did have to take one science, but that was it for those of us who were art students.
And that was your major in college?
My major was English.
Okay, very good. What was your impression of the English courses here? What did you have to take?
Well, the English courses, I thought, in the freshman year, I remember specifically, there was a book called The Study of Poetry by a Father Connell. And this was the course taught by Mr. Shanahan, who eventually became president of the college. And I enjoyed that course. I think I could almost, word for word, have given you the text of that book because it was very interesting and very enjoyable to me, of course, as an English major. And then, of course, I particularly enjoyed a class with Mr. Richard Nevins. Mr. Nevins was a teacher of English. He was a teacher also of public speaking. And he was a fine musician involved with the Glee Club. And I must say this, he, I believe, wrote the new St. Peter's alma mater. And if you think of what was happening back here in 1930, that the school was being renewed, rebuilt, I can almost recite some of the words of the alma mater. I may be a little off base, but if you think of what was happening, I think it goes like this: Hail, alma mater, deathless St. Peter's. And the next line I'm not sure of, but it is something to the degree of your sons proclaim your resurrected name. Now, your resurrected name. This was what was happening to the college. And this was the man who put this alma mater out there. And I tell you, it really stirred us when we had to get up and sing that once in a while.
Still used today. That's the official version.
Is that so?
Oh, yeah.
Very good. Very good.
Marston Haddock, I think, redid some of the music to it.
Uh-huh.
But,
Yeah, I remember that distinctly
we
because it was
resurrected it. We're still here.
so apropos, you know.
Yeah, it worked.
Yeah, I was just going to say, okay, tell me about young Mr. Shanahan. Can you tell me about his teaching influence and what he was like as a young professor?
Well, I'd say that he was a teacher that one could warm up to very readily. He was a very calm person. You could question him. You could ask him anything. He knew the subject very thoroughly. And as I said, he was a very low-key individual. And I think he, together with some other teachers I had, made a great influence on me professionally as far as later years were concerned. And much, I guess, of what maybe I put into teaching or education came from many of these teachers, particularly a man like Mr. Shanahan, because I tried to be a kind of low-key person. I guess one could say I could get a little upset once in a while, and students used to sometimes say of me, when his voice lowers, bug off, because when my voice went down, that meant my tolerance level was reaching a low. And I think that was the kind of discipline that you could see in a teacher like this, that he knew what he was doing, he was instructing us, we were enjoying it, but there were limitations. A great teacher, great teacher.
Okay, staying on the teacher theme, the $1 Million faculty. Can you tell me about the $1 Million faculty and your impressions of them and how they helped you out?
Well, my understanding of the $1 Million faculty was that in an effort to, I guess, stimulate enrollment at the new college, I think the Jesuit leadership felt that they wanted to go out and bring in their best, their best. It's like the hallmark saying, we cared enough to send you our very best. Here they were, okay? And among those that I particularly remember were, of course, Father Robert I. Gannon, who was dean, and a wonderful man, down to earth. Here was a famous man, lecturer, writer, and yet we were like his children. And he was very interested in our keeping up scholastically. And at the end of, I guess, call them marking periods, he would call the students in to discuss their grades with them. And again, if my memory serves me correctly, if he came upon a student who had a good set of grades after having just reviewed some poor ones, I think his statement was, it is like finding an oasis in the desert. This was Father Gannon. And I know I had some reason to get some advice after he had left here and gone to be, I guess, president of Fordham. And I went over to Fordham and asked to see Father Gannon, and he welcomed me. And basically, I think what he was saying was, I miss St. Peter's. He was a good man. And then, of course, there was Father Rankin, and his name was R. Rush Rankin. And we affectionately called him R Cube because of the 3 R's. And he was a great dynamic personality, a little man, forceful, energetic, and a great teacher of philosophy. And of course, Father Chetwood, who was a teacher of religion, a just wonderful, wonderful person. He would instruct us in religion, and he was so interested, I think, in seeing to it that we were on the right track, that the one important thing in this world was saving one's soul. And I can see him now, because he used to look at us with a little squint in his eye. Look, and he used to hold out his hand and recite the parable of the pearl of great price and say, the pearl of great price. when he found it, he went out and sold all that he had. Now think about that, men, he would tell us. And once in a while, if we were having a little trouble maybe understanding the text, he would smile and say to us, "And what does your learned author have to say about that?" Of course, the learned author was Thomas B. Chetwood himself, and the text was called God and Creation. I remember that very well, but I can still see that image of this man with the pearl in his hand. Great, great man. One of the best. So I would say that Father Johnson, whom I mentioned before, Father Chetwood, Father Rankin, Father Gannon, these were, I'd say, the big four of the $1 Million faculty. And when you consider the type of instruction which was being made available to us with this type of faculty, we were just blessed, that's all. Great teachers, great.
Wonderful. And can you tell me about some of the other teachers who may have been like lay faculty or other Jesuits who came later after that group that you may have experienced?
Well, we had, I remember a scholastic named Mr. James Conway, a very handsome man. And he taught Latin. And a little anecdote connected with Mr. Conway was there was I think a fall masquerade dance which was put on yearly by the college students. And as we were there, we saw what we thought was Mr. Conway come through the door and dance up a storm with some very lovely young lady, only to find out later when Mr. Conway did come through the door that this was his identical twin who was there. But he shook us up for a while. But he was a good one. And then there was a chemistry teacher, Mr. George Shea, who had a great Boston accent, which we love to hear. And educationally, I can remember one man, his name was J. Henshaw, who was very, very helpful to us who were education people, wanting to go out and teach, and assigning us for student teaching in such a way that it was possible for us to go out and do our student teaching, because he arranged largely to get us into schools which had double sessions, because you see, we needed that time. We could not get that time off as is given today in colleges, where you get release time to go out and do this. We couldn't do that because of, as I said before, taking all of the credits that we had to take, plus the 30 credits in philosophy. So I recall when I went out to student teach, I was sent to Dickinson High School in Jersey City because it had an afternoon session from 1 to 5:30, and I think it was through Mr. Henshaw and some of the schedulers that most of my classes were set up in the morning, so that at 12:30 I would zip out of here, go up to Dickinson, and then spend the afternoon there getting in my student teaching. And that was very important, because if that hadn't been possible, one would have graduated without that necessary requisite, and you would have had to come back and do that sometime. So I thought it was very, very good the way this operated. Plus the fact that when I was there, another thing which I think this man made possible, which doesn't always happen, in the junior year one goes out to do some student observation. And I did go to Dickinson. That was where I was sent the first time around. And I was fortunate to find that my cooperating teacher was a man named Edward McNally, who was a St. Peter's prep man, and so there was a natural liaison between the two of us, and he was a great teacher, another man who influenced me tremendously. And when I had to go back for my student teaching, I requested, if possible, get me back to Ed McNally, and they did. And so I thought this was another very fine thing which the college took care of. They wanted us, I guess, to have what was best for us all the time. So these were some of the people. And there was, of course, Father Thomas Doyle, who was the director of Sodality, and a Father Vachel Brown, another good man, who was an English teacher and was involved with a lot of the I think, extracurricular projects of the school. And of course there was Father Deneen. Now, not a teacher, but the president at the time that we came up here to the hill, as we said. And he was the man whose responsibility it was to raise the money. And my mother said, Father Deneen could get blood from a stone because he could. He was such a kindly, gentle man, such a great approach. And when money was needed to continue the building up here, he produced it. And one of the most unusual things which he did, and I think this was early on, he conducted what was called the Great Peacock Radio Card Party. And there was a huge gathering of people in Collins Gym, playing cards, paying their whatever it was to come in, participate. But throughout the entire North Jersey area, or any place where students from St. Peter's were involved, those parents and friends were invited to have parties in their own homes. And the proceeds from these were then sent on to the college. And there was a running tabulation which went on, I think it was on WNEW at the time. And they did very well. But this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, the Great Peacock Radio Card Party. Father Deneen.
Well, you mentioned yourself, you're a radio veteran of sorts and a musician, just leading up into what Bill was talking about in terms of musical activity. Can you tell me about your involvement with that? And
Well, at the college, there were really two, I'd say, big, important musical organizations. One was the Glee Club, and the other one was the orchestra. Now, the orchestra, I think, at the very beginning of the college in 1930, was known as the Juneau Symphony. It was not known as a jazz band or whatever you'd like to call it. But in these days, I guess, it was the era of swing and the big band, so-called, the Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman type of thing. And so that Juneau Symphony eventually became the St. Peter's Collegians. And for uniforms, we had blue mess jackets and tuxedo trousers, bow ties, music stands. Everything was done very professionally. And I guess we had about 10 or 11 people in this group. There were a couple of trumpets, 4 saxes. Mike O'Neill was the fellow on piano, drum. And from time to time, we would find that we were looking for an instrument which just wasn't available at the college. There was no one who played this instrument. And however, one of my classmates, his name was Joe Briccato, had a relative who played trumpet, and he came in as a so-called St. Peter's Collegian, and we needed a bass fiddle player. And we found a man whose name was Gaetano Friga, Gate Friga. He, in time, though he never attended St. Peter's College, he in time became a member of one of the perhaps most fabulous jazz quintets in this country. It was called the Joe Mooney Quartet. And you can see his picture and the history of this group in books by George Simon, who is the authority on jazz. And yet, one day, I have to mention this because I think Gate would like me to. I knew him anyhow. He was from Patterson, Gate Friga. I was walking along a street in Patterson, and Gate came along, and I said to him, "How are you?" He said, "I'm fine." I said, "How's music?" He said, "I've given it up." He said, "This isn't what God wants me to do." He became a Capuchin priest and was known as Father John. Great story, great story. But he was one of the ones. And what we did with the collegians, we not only played for dances in the school, but as the group became professionally quite good, we found we had many bookings throughout the metropolitan area because we didn't lack for booking agents, because you see, every student in the school who thought we were worth it, was willing to suggest to his parish or his church that I've got a group of people that you might want to bring in here. So we played many dances at schools and churches in the Hudson County area, in Long Island, in New York, wherever. And it was an accepted part of the collegian's existence that we would accompany the Glee Club. The Glee Club would give its concert, usually at some women's colleges, such as Georgian Court, St. Elizabeth's, Notre Dame, whatever. And then the collegians would provide the music for dancing, which followed. So it was a dual situation. And it was a very enjoyable time for us. We enjoyed it much.
Very good. And that adds to my next question about the social atmosphere at St. Peter's. What did you do in terms of like social activity, dances, other types of formal events?
Well, there were, back in those years, everything was formative. There wasn't too much which was established. But there was a little dance called the Scene Shifters Hop, which was put on by those people who were connected with the Dramatic Society. And there was usually a masquerade. And there was the prom. And some fine orchestras, big names in the country, were brought in to play at these affairs. And I would say that also socially, in addition to the dances, we had an excellent debating team, an excellent dramatic club, so that these things in themselves, when they were being presented, the debates or the plays or whatever, here at St. Peter's, it was another social event, and we all turned out for it. And I always marveled. I was never involved in the debating society, the Bellarmine Society, but you can imagine the power of these men, their ability to think on their feet, because they were not debating, say, teams from some, say, small colleges. They took on the University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, Cambridge of England came over. Not only did St. Peter's win these debates, but on one occasion, and I never got over this, they debated one side of the question. The next night, they debated the other side, and they won both evenings. They were marvelous technicians, could think on their feet, great. So these were many of the social events which did take place. And in addition to the dances, they were very well attended. I would say there was a good spirit and much support for anything that went on.
How about athletics and other types of?
Well, athletics, I myself, although I am much interested in sports, I'm not a participant, but I would say we started out small, but grew and grew. And I can remember specifically an unforgettable basketball game in which St. Peter's killed Duke by a score of about 101-50. And I think this was in the day of Elnardo Webster, who was one of the big stars. And that just made the campus ecstatic to feel that we could do that. And of course, the fact that St. Peter's recently was in the NCAA is another feather, I think, in the cap of the college. So I think they had a very good sport program, considering the problems they had initially, working from, practically scratch. But they were wise to, the gym was the first really solid building which was put up here, the college gym and auditorium. So sports-wise, I think they have come a long, long way. Long way.
How you doing? Would you like to take a break, or are you fine?
Fine.
Good, you're doing great. I'm learning a lot. Are we having fun, Vince? Isn't this great? Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you about your own extracurricular. I can never say that word.
Curricular.
Thank you.
Okay.
Activities at St. Peter's, and if you can give me some detail about the organizations and your involvement in them. We'll start with the Sodality, as you were
Well,
saying.
the Sodality was a religious organization, the Sodality of the Blessed Virgin Mary, And it was a matter of, I guess, not only being a member, but participating in, say, various liturgies. And from time to time, for instance, in Lent, we would be involved with the Stations of the Cross, or individuals in the Sodality would be asked to give a little talk on, say, maybe one of the mysteries of the Rosary, or one of the Stations of the Cross, or anything that had some kind of religious significance. And I'd say it was well attended, and there was a good religious spirit here. Another thing which had nothing to do with the Sodality, but which I remember distinctly, particularly when we were down in the Chamber of Commerce building, and it's a thing that I still pursue in a sense, and that is the Novena of Grace to St. Francis Xavier, one of the great Jesuits, of course. And that was on March 4th to the 12th, and it was usually over in St. Peter's Church down on Grant Street. And a goodly number of the collegians would be over there participating, and I think this was, to a degree, the influence of the Sodality. And of course, once we came up here, one of the great pleasures was to have an on-site chapel where one could go and, just talk to the Lord from time to time and get a little help where needed.
'Tis true, 'tis true. Okay, the Kilmer Poetry Society.
Well, the Kilmer Poetry Society was largely given over to the reading of poetry, having guest speakers, in some cases actual poets, come in and deliver poetry to the students. There was much discussion that went on, and I think one of the great values of that society was that there was always an effort made to equate or to relate what was going on in the literature and the poetry to some kind of life situation, so that the reader would feel, I've come out of this with something which I can apply to myself. And I was always very impressed by that. And in later years, when I was in a position to do so, I actually established an elective course in John Kennedy High School in Patterson, where I was teaching, called A Study of Poetry. And the whole theory behind it was, again, poetry for life, to equate these things, to apply it to life situations, so that there was always much discussion, which would come out of, in some cases, 4 lines of poetry. And it could go on, and I hope it had an influence, say, on lifestyles and the way in people lived and profited by this poetry. So naturally, as an English major, I was much interested in the poetry end of it.
Very good. Okay, and putting on to the literary end of it, the Peacock Pie.
Well, I was an associate editor of the Pie, and part of my assignment was to do some of the write-ups on the extracurricular activities. And as you might suspect, one of the write-ups that I was asked to do had to do with the collegians, because they were the musical organization, and there were some others. But I was very pleased to do that, because I liked that. That was good work.
Okay, and Cross Keys, says you were a member of that organization.
Well, yes. That was called the February Cross Keys. And I'm almost hesitant to talk about it, because it was as if some of these key awards were done as the result of certain achievements. This was given to a person, I think, in the senior year, who was selected by his fellow peers as, I guess, being a typical St. Peter's person, which pleased me no end, that they were willing to think that I was the typical St. Peter's man. That's the February Keys.
Very good. They chose the right man, as it says here in your yearbook entry. It says, you were known for your knowledge and thoughtfulness, and you ranked high in all kinds of school-related pursuits. So you're the man. You're the man. Okay, moving on to the academic end of things, but actually the student body first. Can you tell me what your classmates were like? What was the ethnic and religious and socioeconomic
Okay.
breakdown?
To the best of my knowledge, although naturally this would be somewhat limited, I would say that most of these people were, many were Irish Americans. Many. I myself, I guess, would be Alsatian German. There were a good number of Germans. There, to the best of my knowledge, there were practically no Hispanics. Maybe a few. Tell you the truth, I think in our class, I remember a good man named Lopez, and there were a number of Italians. I don't think we had any black students at the time. But I don't think there was any kind of bias or ethnicity that anyone felt. We were all welcome. Economically, it was hard to tell. I would say that some of the students may have come from affluent homes, some not. To give you an idea, though, talking about the economics of the time, the tuition for a year at St. Peter's College was $180, $90 a semester. Of course, you got to remember that newspapers were 2 cents and 3 cents, and you could buy bread for 5 cents and gasoline for 17 cents. But nevertheless, Father Deneen, when he was attempting to raise money for the college in addition to his great card party, had a little trick called buy a brick for St. Peter's. $10. And it was difficult to sell the brick to many people because $10 was hard to come by. So I would say that these were hard times. Don't forget, this was the Depression. You've got to remember that. We were coming out of a depression because when I started here at St. Peter's, I had just graduated from a Catholic high school, and the money that we had in the bank to produce that high school yearbook was frozen. And it was only the result of the parish bailing us out that we were able to produce that book. So that times were hard. I don't know whether anyone would recall this, but in the city of Patterson, of course I was not working at the time, but if you were working in the city of Patterson, you were paid with something called script. It was not money, it was script. But what you did with this, you could use it in a way whereby it would come back to the city. In other words, if you had to pay taxes, you paid the taxes in script, okay? There might be other people, for instance, who, depending upon their situation, would sell, say, $100 worth of script for $80 worth of real cash, because this person could use that script. So that these were really hard times. But as I say, I do think there were some of the students here who came from affluent families, but you would not know it from the behavior of the students. There was no attempt to show off, to lord it over anybody, to say, look at me, or look, I've got a car and you haven't. I'd say we were all on a very, very even basis. And to me, prejudice just didn't exist. Didn't matter, you know, whether you were this nationality or that or this color or whatever. It didn't exist. Not to my knowledge. I didn't think so.
Okay, did you know a student named Hudson Oliver who was in the at St. Peter's in the late 30s? I think he was the first African American to attend.
I know the name, but I didn't know him.
Okay, and I've heard, how about women on campus? I know there probably wasn't.
There were no women in our time. No women.
Not even any working?
No. Unfortunately. for us. But I believe at the time there was an evening division, Hudson College, and I believe young ladies were there in say, the business aspect of the school, but not in the day school. I don't know just when the first women came into the college. I don't know. Not in our time.
Okay, very good. Okay, and you mentioned economics. I've heard some students, they used to work down at the post office for a part-time job. Did you have any jobs while you were working at St. Peter's in addition to?
All the jobs that I had were professional music. As I said, I would either be playing in a small group or whatever groups I could. Because in those days, very often you played in what was known as a pickup band. If there was someone who was an excellent booking agent, let's say, and a musician, he would have a list of potential musicians, various instrumentations, and he might book 3 jobs in one night. So what he would do, you see, would be he'd call up all of these other people, and he would send them out under his name, like Jim Jones and his orchestra, with a banner. And usually he had a library of music sufficient in size that he could parcel it out, so that what he was doing, although each one of us was getting paid as an individual, he was getting 3 pieces of the pie because he was doing this. And in those days, even though there was a depression on, dances were very popular. There was a lot of dances being held in dance halls in various places, so that I spent a lot of time professionally playing music, if not, say, at dances, say, in what I called then a roadhouse. I remember one place in particular, it was out, I think, in Rochelle Park, and I guess we were the so-called house band there on Saturday nights. We went out every Saturday and played. And that was how we attempted to sustain ourselves, as opposed to doing something else, like working in a store or whatever.
Okay. Well, you're attending school at St. Peter's. How were the semesters or class schedules broken down when you attended?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, as I think back of it, it was first semester was September through January. Then I think there was the second semester, February through June. So it was really a 2-semester situation. There was no tri-semester or anything like that. It was just 2 semesters.
And did you have a dress code?
Not really. Not anything that was required to my knowledge by the college. It seemed to me that maybe the most common dress you'd find on the young men there was a jacket, pair of trousers, not necessarily matching, sometimes a sweater, sometimes a tie. But there was no specific dress code as such, as I remember.
Okay, and
But I would say this, that although there wasn't a dress code, I don't think I ever saw a student in those days in sneakers in a classroom. Today, the dress is much more casual.
I think Father Gann would have a fit if I saw anybody in shorts or
I think
sneakers.
so. I think so.
Yeah, from what I understand. Okay, can you tell me what the typical day was like from rising till going to bed in the life of a St. Peter's College student?
Well, in my case, at least for the first few years, I commuted by train, because in those days, St. Peter's was strictly a commuter's college. It was a day hop college. And there were no dorms or anything like that, so one had to live within fair radius. And I lived about a block and a half from the Erie station in Patterson. And I would get up, have breakfast, and I think when I could just about hear that whistle of the train down the road a piece, I would rush down the stairs, run down the street, and catch the train at 8:02, and get into Jersey City around 8:37, get into the Hudson Tube, and get up here to the college. And I guess classes started somewhere around 9 o'clock. The classes were simple in say form. They were just largely, you know, chairs, armchairs, desks, nothing fancy, nothing decorative, not too much on bulletin boards, but good solid education going on in the classroom on the part of the teacher. And usually there would be a little byplay between people during the breaks between classes. And during lunch period, some of us would eat in the cafeteria. Some would not. I'd say that the main dish in the cafeteria usually was meatloaf, maybe 5 days a week, except Friday in those days. And very, very many of us would bring lunch. And we would then maybe adjourn to what was called the common room. And those people who were talented would put on a little bit of entertainment. I remember two fellows in my class, Pat Mahan and Cy Kiernan. And Pat played a ukulele, and he had some great Irish songs. One that I remember distinctly, I wish I knew the words of it, was called Clancy's Wooden Wedding. And he would play, and he and Cy would sing. And it was this kind of interesting thing that went on in the common room. Maybe Mike O'Neill would sit down at the piano, or people would just discuss what was going on with the Yankees or the Giants or the Dodgers. And once in a while, if I guess we had the wherewithal, we would retire to a bakery, which was about a block away from the Chamber of Commerce building. It was a German bakery called Dortmund's, and they had some excellent pastry and coffee. So if we could afford to get over there, as opposed to not getting over, we would go over and, again, sit around and just talk. So the day went on, and then, of course, it was a matter of getting back, getting to the Erie station for us. And there was quite a bit of good camaraderie on the train, because, you see, the Erie main line stopped at many of the towns that fed into St. Peter's. Like when I got on Patterson, there were probably already some of the lads who got on above, say all the way coming down from Suffern, New York, Hawthorne, Glen Rock. And then after Patterson, we'd pick up people in Clifton and Passaic, so that by the time we got into Jersey City, it was a very friendly group. And of course, we all hung together on the train, and it was nice. I still, once in a while, see a fellow from the class of 36, Jerry Harrison, who was a Passaicite who used to ride that train every day, and we'd get it on the way back. So once we'd get home, of course, it was a matter of settling down to whatever was going on, to doing whatever homework was assigned, and in my case, I guess, to picking up my instrument and going out to play at a dance or whatever. An interesting thing about the commuting, there was one morning when, for some reason, school was called early, and it was around 11 o'clock. And myself and a good friend, Bob Grady, who came from Patterson, figured if we could get down to the Erie station, we might be able to get that first mainline train back to Patterson in a hurry. So we rushed down, and we could see they identified the areas the train were going by lights. The main line was a white light, then there was a Newark branch, which was a blue light. So we saw this white light shining. So without any hesitation, we roared in through the gate, got on the train, and were whisking along through, I guess, Rutherford, when the conductor came along and said, "I see by your ticket you're going to Patterson." I said, "Yes." He said, "This is the Chicago Express." "What? The Chicago Express?" Then he looked and said, "We do pick up mail at Patterson. I'll let you off." Would have been an opportunity to visit the Midwest.
It's a good road trip.
Yeah, right.
Wow, thank goodness he said, you know, get off here. Wow, that's interesting. Okay, did you how about your homework assignments? Did you, I know you're all day in class and you go home, so probably the academics continued over when you were?
Well, I would say that a good deal might depend upon the subject area. If it were an area which I was very happy and familiar with, it was a cup of tea. On the other hand, I was never an outstanding mathematician or a science person, so I would have a little problem. I might have to really work over this. And I remember one time, I think, I was trying to handle the math, and we had a test in school and in the college. And I think when the blue books, because the blue book was the item which was used to take the test, you know, I think mine came back with a 29. So I thought, my goodness. But then the scholastic who was teaching the course said, no, I had to grade these on a scale. And my 29 looked very good. So it wasn't outstanding, but I thought, I guess I don't know too much about this math. But I remember that distinctly. And there was one course we took. We were upperclassmen. We were up on the campus, and it must have been the senior year. And we had to read a book called Topics of Criticism. It had to do with literature. And it even had a Latin title, Loci Critici. And it was not the most interesting book to read. And as you said, with many of the other diversions, distractions, we came to the end of the term, and it was a course where everything depended on that last examination. And again, if I remember correctly, because I remember sitting in one of the classroom buildings here in the spring and watching the grass come up bit by bit each day. I wasn't paying too much attention to what was going on. But when we got to the end, there were 5 of us who were truly desperate because we didn't know what was going on in the book. So we called a meeting in the cafeteria, and it was decided, not necessarily on an even 100-page basis, but we divided the book into 5 parts. Each one, go home, really cram this, break it down, put it on paper, make 5 copies. We will meet here in so many days. We did, we exchanged the papers, we took the test, we all did well. Although I think within a week we forgot everything. But that was a problem too, you see, because there was a lot to do, a lot to do. And very often too, if we were out on the road with the collegians, the orchestra, I remember some days leaving the college, going home to Patterson. Then someone would come to pick me up by car, another one of the collegians, and we would go to the job. In some cases it might be in New York or Long Island, and maybe get back home 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and come to class the next day and try to keep awake. And I remember some kind, understanding teacher saying, I can understand you men are having trouble, so sit in the back, close your eyes, but don't snore. So these were other problems too when you were connected with that kind of organization, because you were on the road and it was late. Late.
Well, that's a common tendency, right, Vince, to forget things right after you learn. So you're not in the minority there. Okay, well, rules and regulations. You're touching upon it a little bit earlier, but did you have any formal do's and don'ts as a student at St. Peter's that you had to follow?
Well, I'd say the one thing that I remember was if I remember again correctly, was the cut system. In other words, it wasn't a question of how many days you could be absent. You were expected to attend class every day. And in an individual quarter, because they broke the semesters into, say, halves. In other words, you had 2 semesters, but then within each semester there was like a quarter. If you had a subject 1 day a week, you could cut that class 1 day. That's all, in the course of that quarter, okay? If you had a subject 5 days a week, you could cut that class 5 times, okay? Of course, you were risking not knowing what was going on lecture-wise, unless you had someone relate it back to you, because you were not there. The great danger, of course, was if you really were sick and you had to use the days, you'd fail. In other words, you just could not pull it out. So what people used to do would be they would save their days until the end of the quarter. So it would be possible, you see, if you did that, to take a week off. Because you see, no matter how many classes you had in that week, if you hadn't used any of these cuts, they were all there for the asking. But then you see what the professors used to do, and it really wasn't a great idea for the students either. They would schedule tests, key tests, at those times. So if you didn't come for the test, you were in trouble. But I would say that these were primarily the key regulations which went on. It was a matter of attendance, cutting, or overcutting, as they said. Because if you overcut, then you didn't get credit for that quarter. The only other rules and regulations, of course, they weren't school regulations, but they were what I would call the regulations imposed by sophomores during the initiation period. And again, if my memory serves me, late in September there was something called the Michaelmas Convocation. And that was toward the end of the month. Now by that time, the freshmen had come to know each other fairly well, but you see the sophomores had a great advantage because they knew each other. We probably couldn't distinguish in some cases a freshman from a sophomore, so we might not know with whom we were dealing. And I remember as soon as you got off, or at least that I got off the tube, you had to wear a freshman beanie within 1 block of the school. This was St. Peter's colors, blue and white. And there was some kind of a book of regulations which you were supposed to know and recite. You were supposed to carry matches for the sophomores. And after the Michaelmas Convocation Mass, this was the so-called initiation of freshmen by sophomores. And it was held, I think, over in York Hall in the old prep building. And it was a known fact. It was well known as each class came in. This was a vital part of it. There was something known as the sophomore shampoo, in which they took eggs, broke them, and ran them through your hair. And by the time I was a freshman, they had added a new touch, molasses, so that you see if this was in your hair to this degree, in some cases, you wound up having to shave your hair, unless you could wash it out so thoroughly. Fortunately, in my case, they were calling the freshmen up to the stage, and they had what they called a sophomore gauntlet. And they had sophomores who's like this. You had to run underneath this. And they paddled you all the way through if they could. And when you got to the end, the sophomore shampoo was administered. However, they were so zealous, and since my last name began with W, by the time they got to me, they had run out of material. So I came off without the shampoo, although most of us wound up with blackened faces, shoe black and stuff like that. And then, in order to try to bring this hazing to an end, there was usually a social event at Bear Mountain on Columbus Day. And there was a tug of war. If the freshmen won, the hazing was over. If they didn't, it continued until Thanksgiving. But these were some of the regulations that I can remember. Oh, another thing too was that I think freshmen were not supposed to ride down in the elevator. You could go up in the elevator in the Chamber of Commerce, because in those days I think we had the top 3 floors in those days. And on one occasion, however, there was a porter of happy memory. I knew only his first name. It was Saul. And he was the elevator operator and so forth. And so the freshmen conspired to get him to pick up the sophomore leader. They called themselves the Vigilantes. And in the meantime, the freshmen were waiting, sort of hiding. And when this elevator took off, it was stopped between floors with just this one sophomore and the rest of the freshmen. And they really did him in. and rolled them out on the ground floor as a bit of payback. But these were good times. And then usually after the convocation and the initiation, they would either take the freshmen, try to get the freshmen to go to Journal Square or to the City Hall. And there was a great rally. And I remember distinctly in our case that one of our established leaders was a fellow named Jerry Hughes, and he was a bristling red-headed Irishman. And so the sophomores had commissioned him to make a speech lauding the virtues of the sophomore class. So when Jerry got up on the platform, he started out by saying, "Gentlemen and sophomores." This caused an immediate riot. The police had to come and disperse the group, and the initiation came to a happy end.
And you came out of it okay.
Oh yeah, we came out of it okay.
That's funny. That's funny. How you doing? You
Good.
doing
Fine.
You're doing wonderful. I can't wait to look at this tape. This is great stuff. Okay. In terms of testing and classroom instruction, can you tell me what a typical classroom looked like, and also once you're in the classroom, how was instruction usually administered? How did the teachers usually do their teaching?
Well, the typical classroom in my day was, I'd say, down to the barest essentials. In other words, there was a desk chair where you could do your work on the desk. There was nothing fancy about the classroom. It was strictly down to work. There were blackboards, which were used properly and desirably by the teacher when needed. And there was a good deal of the instruction was to a large degree by lecture. In other words, there was a lecture, you were expected to take notes and then to give back at a later time, either on a test paper or through questioning, what you had been instructed on. I'd say this was, I guess, their scholastic method of teaching, the Jesuit method. In other words, we're going to tell you what we want you to know and you better give it back to us, okay? As opposed to, say, some of the different methods of administering education today. I would say that all of the instructors were, they knew what they were doing. They knew their subject. And I think it's very important for a teacher to always come to class prepared, and they were, because if you're not prepared, that student body outside will know it very quickly, and you will lose face, you will lose your grip on that group of students in front of you. So although the classrooms were very drab and there was nothing fancy about them, the instruction which went on was top grade. And it was also done so that when it was a lecture method, it was done to the point it was very interesting, so that you didn't fall asleep because you wanted to hear what was going on. And as a matter of fact, it was possible almost, if you had really a great instructor, to practically come out and mouth what he said, because it just made that kind of an impression on you. Naturally, this was true, of course, in classes which were more the verbal type of thing as opposed to math and the science, because that was an entirely different mode of instruction. But then the philosophy classes, of course, were always great, and there was always room for discussion. And of course, we thought it was really something when we came up to the Hill, and I guess it was Father Gannon's innovation, which he brought from Oxford, the undergraduate gowns, which you had to wear to philosophy class. Had to wear them to philosophy class. Didn't have to wear them elsewhere. You had to wear them to the philosophy classes. If you didn't wear them, Father Riken would not let you in. He used to say, "Gentle, gentlemen." He used to say, "Gentle, gentles." It's philosophy class.
Sounds pretty severe.
He was anything but. He was a stern man, but I mean, likable. He was just a dynamo, this man. You understand he had been a chaplain in World War I, too. He must have been a great one. Great one. Great man.
Do you recall any incidents that would be considered unusual or odd, or that would show like you know, a distinctive side of the Jesuits outside of traditional stern teaching?
Well, I don't know. I'd say there, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I could relate to you.
Okay, we only have 500 more now. Now we're winding down. Don't worry, you're doing good. Okay, English major, as you mentioned. Can you tell me about some of the class titles? You mentioned before some of the teachers and the content, but some of the class titles and how these titles and the program in particular helped you after graduation.
You're not talking just about English.
Okay. Well, okay. We'll break. I'm sorry, I gave you too much. Yeah, just the titles and just how they helped you in school and.
Well, I would say that as far as the English was concerned, the titles were very conventional. In other words, there would be Shakespeare, American literature, English literature, topics of criticism, study of poetry, things of this type, public speaking. However, because I was an English major in that area, all of these things were very, very helpful to me because I would be able to carry them over into anything that I did. I would say that, interestingly enough, although I became a teacher and that became my profession, I was very, very nervous and most fearful of standing in front of a classroom when I was a student. To get up and say, give an oral composition, awful. Sweat would pour from my arms. And I couldn't imagine, but I figured I had to force myself to do this. And I would say that listening to these people, seeing how they did these things, seeing their ease, their calm, helped me because in time, as a matter of fact, a little interesting anecdote, which doesn't have to do with college, but talking about my fear of teaching and how I guess the Jesuits gave me the desire to go out and lick it. When I was in high school, we had a public speaking teacher who appeared once a week. His name was Professor Edmund Dean. He was a very good man, a Shakespearean scholar. And he used to come into St. Joseph's High School and call on us to recite certain things which he had assigned. And I was fearful. Now, as you know, my name, Francis Walter, my last name could be a first name and vice versa. And so this man apparently was confused when he came to my name in his roll book. And he'd come into class week after week and call, now we will hear from Walter Francis. I never got up because that wasn't my name. I just sat there. And this went on for several weeks. But one day, the regular teacher, a good nun named Sister Rose Carmel, Sister of Charity, was in the classroom. And of course the class went right along with me, you see. But when he came in and announced this, Mr. Walter Francis, and I didn't get up, the good nun fired a blast. Francis, get up there. And so I had to get up and do my thing. But this would give you an idea of the terror that I had. And it was ironic almost that I wound up professionally standing in front of classes or even here talking at ease because I think I was given that confidence once I reached the college level to get up and do this kind of thing. So
it seems like the Jesuit influence helped you after college.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In many ways, just in thinking, whether it be professionally or in life situations, family situations. And talking about Father Chetwood, I thank him too for the fact that when my first job was teaching in a Catholic high school, St. John's Cathedral High School in Patterson. And of course, you opened every class with a prayer. And the invocation which I used was one that was Father Chetwood's favorite. Mary, seat of wisdom, pray for us. So I used that, and it always brought that man back to me. So there was a great influence, as I say, particularly, I think, on thinking clearly, trying to organize. This was a very important thing which I think I was taught here.
Did you stay in touch with any other Jesuit priests after graduation?
Not really, not really. As I say, I would come back on and off, but then again, you see, many of the priests that I had were moved. So that as time went on, like I have friends, I have a brother-in-law who went to school here, but you see, when they talk about the priests of their time, I'm lost because these priests have long gone. And so I really didn't maintain that kind of contact.
Okay. Well, speaking of Jesuits, the religious atmosphere on campus, you belong to Sodality.
Right.
Can you just tell me about the spiritual and maybe the religious aura around campus when you were a student here?
Well, I think it was a presence that you could almost feel. I felt that the whole deportment of the students that I was familiar with, and I was familiar with many of them, because the school was that small, which was one of the great features of it, that after you were here for a while, you got to know people who were sophomores, juniors, seniors, even as lowly freshmen. We got to know these people and to identify with them, and they were always very, very solicitous of us. And so it would be rare, if you can equate this with what goes on today, to hear any kind of bad language or anything like that. And it was always nice to see, as you were passing through the halls, someone going by the chapel and stopping in to make a visit, to talk to the Lord. And I guess in time, you began to think, hey, it's not a bad idea. I might be able to go in there and, talk to the good Lord myself. So I would say that it was something that we were all conscious of. And certainly, too, the behavior of the faculty. And I can remember, I mentioned before, a Father Vachel Brown. And when we were still down at the Chamber of Commerce, I think the Jesuits used to, I don't know whether they stayed or lived over at the old prep building, but he used to read his office, walking the roof in all kinds of weather. And I never forgot that. That impressed me, that, he had to give the time to the Lord. And I think that's very important. I wish there was more of it today around.
How about the opposite extreme, the political atmosphere on campus?
Well, I would say, as far as I was concerned, that was not my ball of wax. And I don't think, as I recall back into the sessions we had in the common rooms and the cafeterias, that there perhaps was the degree of interest that there might be today in political situations. Although, for instance, those lads who were members of the debating team, they were up on everything. Nationally, internationally, they could take apart any issue that you gave them. But I would say that it was not a big thing, that it wasn't as if we're going to gather down in the common room now and discuss what's going on in Washington or something like that. Maybe what was going on in Jersey City, they would discuss, because many of them were locals, but there wasn't that much of at least I didn't think, of an interest that was displayed.
Okay. And how about students? Who are some of your best friends on campus, and who are some of the more interesting characters among the student body?
Well, say, people that I commuted with. There was Bob Grady from Patterson, and there was an Ed Cleary who came down on another branch of the Erie from Butler. And then on a local basis, I became quite friendly with a Wallace O'Reilly and a Willie O'Reilly, and Mike O'Neill, the judge, Danny Boyle, the man I spoke of before, Vince Daniels, Huey Coyle, and there was a fellow, well, Dr. Swiney, a man whose name was Octavius Joseph Kukelski. He was a rare bird. He was a major, eventually a major in the Army. Great actor in the productions. I would say that these were some of the people that I remember particularly well, and always liked to join when we would get together for gatherings. And as a matter of fact, we would just gravitate to wherever we were. To this particular group was always together. And Jack Heavey, Ed Murphy, Cy Kiernan, Pat Mann. As I say, although we didn't have a large class, I can put a finger on a great many of these people who were really great, great people. An unusual character. He wasn't in our class, but his name was Demi Sposa. And he became Dennis James, Channel 5, went on to become a very famous TV personality, but he was one of the boys on campus. And I would say he was perhaps the person who was most easily remembered because of some of his activities, but he was a very outgoing and flamboyant person.
Very good. Well, you mentioned off camera, if you want to relay it on camera, about Pat Boyle and how his reading and signals used to.
Yeah, that's Danny Boyle. Well, as I say, I met him when we first came. This would be off camera, okay?
Oh, if you don't want to mention it.
No, I'm thinking of Danny. That's all.
Exactly.
I don't know whether he would.
That's what I'm thinking about.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to pass over that?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make you comfortable. I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. Okay. Very good. Okay. We're wrapping down here. This is good. Okay. Well, I have to ask you year by year, just some of the highlights and lowlights. So we'll start with freshman year. You may have mentioned some things before, but anything that comes into your mind, if you want to share.
Well, I'd say the freshman year was primarily an orientation for us and for me. And I guess it was the rivalry between the freshmen and the sophomores, which particularly remains in my mind as far as the freshman year was concerned. Also, the great classes I had with Father Shanahan and Richard Nevin, those men. My freshman year, I would say, that would be my memory. I guess the sophomore year, was a year in which I was trying to decide just where I wanted to go vocationally. And because it was getting to the point now where I guess I had to make course selections which were going to lead me where I wanted to go. And I didn't think that I wanted to go to law nor medicine. And I guess teaching seemed like what I felt I was maybe best suited for. And so I guess it was at that point where I was beginning to think in terms of a future vocation, ideas of at what level, where I would teach, whether it would be elementary, high school, wherever. And I'd say that occupied a good part of my sophomore year. The junior year, I guess we were getting really for the first time into the really good philosophy material, because in the freshman year it was, say, not that thrilling, moving, whatever. And if I remember correctly, it could have been that in the junior year, that might have been the first year when we were introduced to the undergraduate gowns. And the fourth year, I guess I remember specifically hustling between campus and Dickinson High School to try to get my student teaching finished. And also, of course, I remember how great it was to be up on the campus, the new building, the fact that we were the first up here. And my connection with the yearbook was another interesting thing which I enjoyed. So I guess those were the highlights of those years.
Okay, we'll wrap it up. Commencement. You've reached the big day. You recall the process? And
Well, I'm not quite sure whether, I do remember this. We had, I think it was the commencement, a magnificent speaker. I can't remember his name, but he was a congressman. And he spoke at length, at great length, about the importance of Catholic education and the influence of Catholic education on the world over the centuries. This man may have spoken close to an hour. Seemed like 5 minutes. He was marvelous. And you felt happy to be a Catholic or to be in any way affiliated with a Catholic education system. And of course, the very fact that we were graduating up here was in itself a big thing. But I remember that distinctly. I remember my mother being here and being very proud, as she should have been, because she made it all possible. And I think they had, I'm not quite sure, I don't know whether this was outdoors, and they had set up chairs, I thought, out in the front of this temporary classroom building, right here, because it wasn't a large class, and so I guess they could accommodate the numbers. But I remember that. Remember the speech. Great speech.
Do you want to recite it? No. I'm just kidding.
Can't do that.
I know. Okay, well, on that day, can you just give me a visual perspective from your memory, what the campus looked like? Just what was here, and what did you happen to remember about the physical plan, as it were?
Well, as I say, I remember as you would come up Hudson Boulevard to Montgomery, looking straight on at the campus. This was the temporary classroom building, and it seemed to me as if it was made of sheets of plywood, but sturdy. And there was a long corridor which ran straight on down, and then eventually I think it could have connected with, at the far end, Collins Gym. There was a cafeteria down there. I think the Jesuit residence was, I think, across the street at the time. There was a residence there, I think, where the priests were. But that was about it as far as the campus was concerned. In other words, it was just this one straight line down Montgomery Street, ending at Collins Gym. And I'm not quite sure at that stage whether Gannon Hall had been started, but there was the classroom building. As I say, it was a long stretch of hall down. And then you went down a flight of stairs to another level. And as I say, that led you down into the cafeteria area, the common rooms. And there was a chapel off to the left. And the offices were off to the left side, on, say, the Montgomery Street side of the building over there. But in other words, it just didn't extend over here at all. To my recollection. I mean, there were other properties there, but that was about it as far as I remember.
Okay. Well, two other people I just want to ask you about, if you remember them. You mentioned Father Deneen, who was the president, but his successor would be Father Dennis Comey, I believe. Did you happen to know him at all?
No.
Okay.
No.
How about Dean Thomas O'Malley?
I didn't know him either.
Okay. Okay, coming down to the last few. Okay. All right, after college, can you tell me about some of your occupations and what your vocation was, and what were some of the, well, you're a teacher, some of the places you taught?
Okay. I graduated in June 1937. I was 20 years old. I was 20 in March. I graduated in June. I was not the youngest member of my class. The youngest member of my class was Tony Santora, a doctor. He's a doctor, a well-known doctor. He was 19. He had ripped through high school in Patterson. He was another Pattersonian. And I I wanted to teach. The only problem was that teaching jobs were hard to come by. I went out into the highways and byways, and there was nothing out there at the time. In the city of Patterson, in order to get a teaching job, and I almost wish this would happen again today, you had to, if you were an English major or math major, you had to first of all take a really intensive test in your subject area. You had to get a passing grade of 80. If you did that and you were considered, you were then called for an oral interview at the Board of Education. It seemed most important that they wanted to know, among other things, what you knew about your subject matter. Granted, however, as I'm sure you might have found, one can have a great knowledge of subject but not be able to teach it. There are people that just can't sell that bill of goods to anybody. They're geniuses, but they just can't relay it across. So that I took that test in Patterson, and about 80 people took it, and I was, I think, about 14th on the list. But they weren't going to hire 14 English teachers, so the only thing they could offer me was substitute work. And in the meantime, I went around to the Catholic schools, and I found, the good Lord must have been looking down, that I guess it was the day before school was to open at St. John's Cathedral High School, some teacher had decided to not come back. So I went in there. I think the good sister had a little misgivings because I was a young man. And if you stop to think of it, I'd be teaching people who would be maybe 2-3 years younger than I. But she decided, I guess, to take a shot. And so I started to teach at St. John's, and I was there 2 years. In that school, I would be teaching religion, English, history, and I was also, to a degree, involved in their school orchestra, trying to help put this together. This was a rare orchestra. Sister Catherine Anita played the piano. I played the saxophone. A student who is now Monsignor John Morris played the fiddle, and there was a drummer. And so I was there 2 years. I continued to take the test in the city, and I guess it was after my 2 years I took the test, and I was fortunate. I was right up near the top of the list. They appointed 3 English teachers. I was one of them. And so I was sent to Patterson Central High School. I live very close to Patterson Eastside, but for some reason or other, I think I was happy to go to Central. And I was there for, let me see, I don't know, 22 years, I guess, teaching English. And then my department chairman, a wonderful woman named Marion O'Neill, I'm going to have to believe that she had great confidence in me. And when she was planning to retire, I think she hoped that I could succeed her, although one had to do this through testing. And so during the course of my teaching experience, classroom teaching, she used to give me some very, very difficult programs to teach. And I would say to her, Miss O'Neill, why? It's good experience, Francis, she would say. I can see now she was leading me, showing me all of the pitfalls, all of the problems, all of the areas, you see. And when she retired, I did take the required test and was fortunate enough to succeed her. So I became the chairman of the English department at Patterson Central in 1962. And then they moved the school to a different location. And they were going to call it Patterson West Side. But John Kennedy was assassinated, and so it became Kennedy High School. And so I put in, I guess, another 20-some years as the head of the department at Kennedy. So that represented my teaching experience at the high school level. I had also done night school teaching in Patterson, the foreign-born excellent. One of the finest experiences any teacher could want. A way in which a teacher can learn from his students so much, so much. I also taught for some time at a school called Jersey Prep. They used to have a division here, right on the boulevard. But this was for people who needed high school completion, but had to take an actual high school test given by the state. It wasn't a GED type thing. And I also spent some time in the evening division of Fairleigh Dickinson at Rutherford, teaching English. So I guess basically that would involve what I was doing in a classroom or as a department chairman. In the meantime, of course, I continued with my music, and I did quite a bit of that. And there were times, I guess, when I did some merchandising, when I guess I was a young starting teacher and we didn't get a paycheck in the summer. I decided that I better see what I could do with hardware in Sears Roebuck in Patterson. So I did some of that. But it was largely, I'd say, music that sustained me, and that was one of these cases, and so was teaching, getting paid for something that you just love to do. You know, that's to me a most important thing, because I think if a person is working at a job in which they are unhappy, that's unfortunate, unfortunate. But I loved it. I loved to teach, in spite of the fact that I was afraid to stand up in front of the class.
As they say, you've come a long way, baby, right? Okay, well, you mentioned before you were the first in your family to graduate from college, but coming back to the question, can you tell me about your children and your grandchildren?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, get the whole family in here.
I have 3 children. I have an older daughter. Her name is Sheila Ann, and she's married. Her last name is Klupsa. And she and her husband live in Packanack Lake in Wayne, and they have 4 daughters. Sheila herself, after retiring from teaching to have the children, went back to teaching in Patterson. And she is teaching at School 12, not as a classroom teacher, but she's a reading specialist who is coordinating a special reading program called Success for All, in which she is working in conjunction with Johns Hopkins University. They're putting this all together. And it's been, I'd say, a successful program in the inner city. Now, my daughter, Kathleen, she's a teacher also. She actually was in my department. She was one of my teachers. But she is the kind of, I wouldn't say she's the maverick of the family, but she has no toleration for students who do not want to learn. She cannot stand this. And so she decided, she pulled out of city teaching, and she now lives in New York on St. Mark's Place in a village. She is teaching creative writing at New York University, and she's also teaching some other classes in one of the other city schools. She's a freelance writer who has appeared in the New York Times, the Daily News, Time Magazine, many. As a matter of fact, I think she was involved in a controversial article that had to do, I think, with Tompkins Square Park or something like that some years ago. And it attracted great attention. It was very controversial. I think it was in the Times. And she received a call from CBS, I think it was, from one of the big newscasters. And they said that they came down and interviewed her. I think it might have been Dan Rather. Came down and interviewed her at St. Mark's Place. And so she called up, told us, put on your TV. I think I'm going to be on. What happened? Her big chance. Hurricane Hugo hit the eastern seaboard and preempted everything. So this is probably in somebody's files somewhere, the tape. Now my son John, he's the youngest. He is a teacher of English at Patterson Eastside. So they're all teachers. And he's been there over 20 years. And he gets along very, very well. Right now, of course, I wouldn't want to change places with him because so much is being computerized, say in the instruction area. But he he has been there and he enjoys it. He recently, about 3 years ago, bought a home. He's married. He has 3 children. He and his wife now live in Brick, but he commutes every day to Patterson, as many people do. Many people may not realize that, but he's near the Parkway, so he's got to get up early, hit the road. He's got two men who also teach in Eastside, likewise live in that area, so they carpool. So some days he drives, some days he sleeps. But he's up around 5 in the morning, got to get up here, he gets home, and gets on the road. He is also, for the past few years, been really, I guess, the registrar of the summer school at Eastside. So he's right now enjoying a few days of vacation. So those are the children, and as I say, they're all teachers. My wife and I are very proud of them, but I don't think there was any way in which you could say we nudged them or encouraged them. We wanted them to do what they wanted to do. But John frequently says, because my wife is a great listener, that, you know, he says, I learned more about teaching when you would come home every night and sit around and talk to Mom. And he said, I began to think it was all right. So there was always plenty of give and take, you see, at the supper table, where I guess they decided maybe this was the way they wanted to go. And they seemed to be happy, which is the main thing. So my wife, she's the light of our life. She has been housewife and mother for all these years. We were married when she had just turned 20, and she is a native of County Cork, got the old Irish in there, and she's been a great influence for all of us. And you asked about the grandchildren. Now, Sheila's got the 4 daughters. Her oldest girl, Mary Ellen, just graduated from Columbus School of Law at Catholic University in Washington. And she put herself through university there, the postgraduate, by working in the Justice Department in Washington. She was with immigration for a while, and she has already been appointed. As of September 8th, she will be an assistant district attorney for the County of New York, working under Robert Morgenthau. So she's doing well. The next granddaughter, Colleen, she's married. She has a very excellent secretarial job with one of the big drug corporations. And she and her husband, Scott, have a little boy who's 11 months old today. He's the great-great-grandson, and his name is Casey. You can see the Irish influence already. The next girl, Patricia, she finished college at Westchester in Pennsylvania. Okay. I meant to tell you, John, the girls, Sheila and Kathleen, are graduates of Caldwell College for women. That's the Dominican school. John, much to my dismay, is a graduate of Seton Hall. I said to him, John, how could you do this? He was accepted here, but he said, Dad, there's more grass in South Orange, the campus. I meant to put that in before, but Patty, she's a graduate of Westchester, and she is she's a sports therapist. And right now she is looking for a job at the high school level as a trainer. And Monica, she's at the College of New Jersey, that's Trenton State. And she, of those 4 girls, I believe, wants to be a teacher. As a matter of fact, she's starting her student teaching. She's her senior, I guess, as soon as school starts. And then John's, well, Kate's not married, of course, but John's children, he has John Jr., who's 17. He'll be a senior at Brick. And he's not quite sure what he wants to do. He's trying to figure it out. Kelly, she's 13. She's going into the 8th grade. And another girl with an Irish name, Shannon, I guess she'll be 7 in October. And she's going into the 1st grade. But we're all fortunately, we're all down at the shore too in the summer, because my daughter has a small house there. We have a modest house there. And so they're over there. They're great fishing people, great boating people, ocean kayaks, things of that type. So they're having a great time. But we're proud of them all. They're great.
Wonderful. I'm glad you got your wife in there and the whole family, see?
Well, you asked me, so
That's wonderful.
I figure you asked me, I'll tell
We're ready
you.
to wrap it. We had about 10 minutes to
Right.
going.
Don't worry, I only have...
And I have a meeting, so I'm going to run. It's been a pleasure. You've been a wonderful
Bill.
storyteller.
Likewise.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, I only have 2 more questions
Okay.
and they're real quick.
Okay.
Okay, alumni affairs. What's your, do you participate in any alumni functions or anything related to the school?
Well, outside of like reunions on, say, the 5-year basis, or coming back, as I say, to the memorial masses. And I must tell you, since the Golden Peacocks have been formed, I do try to get down. Those are, of course, the people who have been graduated 50 years. And I think an interesting story that you might enjoy was a couple of years ago, we came down here to campus and attended the brunch. And the alumni moderator, the good priest, and the young man who was, I guess, associated with him, welcomed us, and they said, we have a little surprise for you today. In addition to always giving us a very nice pin, gold peacock, they said, we had a banner made for this occasion, and we're going to unfold it word by word as it comes out. And so the first word came out, welcome. Then the next word came out, golden. Then the next word came out. We saw the P, but the rest of it was, welcome golden pheasants. Somebody blew the peacocks. That brought a great bit of laughter. But they said they felt they had to show it to us because it was worthwhile, the golden pheasants. So I usually get back to that when I can.
Glad you do. That's funny. Okay, last question. With your involvement with St. Peter's and your great years here, just say somebody who's watching this tape who hasn't heard of this school, how would you put into words how the college has influenced you, how it's made you grown, how it's made you as a person throughout these years? What can you sum up about your experience at St.
Well,
Peter's?
first of all, as an educator, as a teacher, and as a department chairman, I feel that so much of what I have done in the classroom or in working with my own teachers, because I had a staff of 35 people who taught nothing but English. So we ran 150 classes a day of English. I felt I was able to organize, to plan, to do things with logic. I guess that's the key word. So that everything I felt ran smoothly, particularly the ability to, say, in the work world, to get along with people. It's very difficult when you're dealing with, say, people of different personalities. Particularly, one of the great problems in, say, an area like this is scheduling. You never know what someone wants or doesn't want. Finally, I think, it came to me logically, why not call these people in and say to them, what do you want to teach? And I did. And I was amazed to find, among other things, that some of the subject areas that I felt I might not particularly feel my favorite areas were areas that people wanted. So that by being a little thoughtful about this, by bringing all of this into process, I think I was able to, say, gain that much more rapport with these people of different personalities, and I was amazed at what people told me. People said to me, I don't care what you tell me to teach, but don't schedule me on the side of the building that looks out on the roof. I want to see the park. Want to see the park? I'll give you the park. So that I felt that here, the Jesuit training taught you specifically how to think, how to organize, how to be logical. Say, in my own family, I'd say raising a family, children, different personalities, grandchildren. I think one of the things I learned was that you've always got to keep lines of communication open in a family situation. You can't close the door on anybody. You've got to be able to reach out, no matter maybe what the difficulty is that you find. And so along these lines, I feel that professionally, family-wise, and of course spiritually. I mean, I felt that I was greatly impressed by the religious spirit which I found here at the college. And I mean, I have always felt, my wife always says, you people who were educated by the Jesuits are so loyal to them. But we have reason to be because of what they have contributed and given to us. So I would say that anyone who would be considering a Jesuit education, whether it be at St. Peter's or wherever, just couldn't do any better. That's my thought.
And Mr. Walter, you've been an incredible guest, and I thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Very good. Vince, you have anything to add?